Howdy, folks. This is just a reminder that if you like this content, you can help me out by liking, commenting, and especially by subscribing. And be sure to hit the bell notification so you always get notified whenever I have a new video. Hope you enjoy this.
So Jimmy Akins, he's basically internationally known author, podcaster, researcher, speaker, and I like to think of him as a scholar. Compared to me, he's like, he's like a major scholar. Is he? Wave, Jimmy. I see him back there. He's also a senior apologist at Catholic Answers, right?
Right.
So he basically has more than 30 years of experience defending and explaining the faith, right? And he'll tell us more about that. Jimmy is a convert to the faith and has an extensive background in Bible theology, the church fathers, philosophy, canon law, and more. He also delves into topics from Bigfoot to apparitions and more, and weird topics. He does not ignore those weird topics. It's the reason he's going to be on our show tonight, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about weird stuff. So come on in, Jimmy.
Hey, Jimmy.
Here. Welcome.
Hey, thank you. How y'all doing, gents?
Good. How are you? How have you been?
I'm doing just fine.
Yeah, we it's been, what has it been that long? How long has it been? 3 months since we?
I'm not sure. It's been a little bit. Yeah, but very glad to be back. Happy to talk about whatever y'all'd like to talk about.
Yeah, let's just go. Once again, I think we had brain diarrhea last time. Let's do brain diarrhea. Without getting into any gory graphic details, you must have been a little shocked at the Olympic opening ceremony.
Yeah, now I'm not a sports ball fan, so I wasn't watching it live, but you couldn't miss it on the news.
Yeah.
And it was very sad that they chose to do that. It was deliberately provocative and offensive to Christians, and I guess they feel safe poking fun at Christians or insulting Christians in a way they wouldn't with certain other world religions.
Yeah, it was, and then, the weird thing happened. I don't know if it's true. I heard the lights all went out in Paris, or the electricity power was cut, but only the church had power up on the hill. I don't know if you heard about that.
I heard that the lights went out the next night or something, but I didn't hear about a church having lights.
Yeah, there's the main church, and I've been there. I used to sit up there at night when I was in Paris. I was there for quite a while, and would go up there every night because it was cool up there, and you could watch the lights come on in the city at night. And people would visit, and it was just kind of a neat place to just kind of hang out, right?
So that would be Notre Dame?
I don't even know the exact name. I think they called it it was some basilica. I don't really know.
Okay.
But it was a massive big church with a lot of stairs. Kind of up on the hill up by Paris, so you could literally look down on Paris.
Oh, okay.
And see the lights coming on. But that church was the only thing lit, from what I've heard. And then I heard today, the guy that choreographed that show and put it on was hit by lightning.
Really?
He's now in the hospital. Yes.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yes. Is that weird or what? Maybe somebody in chat can confirm that through the mainstream news. But this guy was hit by lightning.
That would be really unlikely. I mean, it'd be really something if it's true.
At some point, you have to rule out coincidences, which segues me to my next question. Do you believe that most coincidences are not coincidences that we encounter in our life?
Well,
think about that.
So a coincidence is when something two things at least, maybe more than two things, but it would be two things at least coincide with each other. They occur at the same time. And the question is then what causes them to occur at the same time?
Right.
Now, you can answer that question on different levels. God can from a faith perspective, God can arrange that two different things occur at the same time, and he can directly intervene to cause that. And that would involve direct divine agency. And I'm sure there are things in the world that are coincidences that are caused by direct divine agency. But God also uses what's called secondary causation in the world, where he has set things up in such a way that someone other than God or just natural forces produce an effect. And so we know secondary causation happens in the world. So God doesn't directly do everything, but he is still in control ultimately of everything that happens. And so he can use secondary causation to indirectly bring about things like coincidences. And I'm sure there are divinely intended coincidences that involve secondary causation, where God has arranged for other individuals, maybe angels, maybe people, maybe demons, maybe departed souls, or just natural forces to cause two things to coincide. But it's also possible that God may just allow things to happen on their own without him pre-planning every single thing. And so I think it's an open question whether God directly intends every coincidence, or whether God just allows some things to happen and he doesn't have a specific purpose for causing two things to happen at the same time. So I think that people could have different views on that.
Yeah.
That would be how I approach it.
Well, I've always wondered, only because, I mean, I could tell stories of my book is done. It has to be edited by somebody like Alex has to edit it. But it pretty much, the whole book is about coincidences that have happened to me.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It just seemed too far. Like, just a real quick one. When I got into the TV business, I met this guy, ran an ad that ran in California, met this guy named Greg. And then he taught me the whole TV business.
Mm-hmm.
My first show, we did everything. But he was also very interested in just teaching me the business, editing, shooting, just everything about it. And then I went to do my first interview on it for a TV show, to conduct an interview with my film crew. And the guy that I did, eventually I found out those two knew each other. They're both named Greg, both in the same band when they were young. First band ever signed by Motown. And so I named the book after them. It's called Monsters and Messengers. That was the name of their band was Michael and the Messengers.
Oh,
But
okay.
I met one guy in California, one guy in Minnesota. And both were involved in, I mean, what are the chances of that, Jimmy?
Yeah, and in cases where two things coincide and it's really improbable that they would coincide, that makes you sit up and take notice more. There's a higher likelihood that there may be something meaningful in this coincidence, and that's what leads to a special kind of coincidence, which Carl Jung, the 20th century psychiatrist, talked about. He called meaningful coincidences where there's no obvious causal connection between two things, but nevertheless something happens and it's meaningful to the people involved. He referred to those as synchronicities. And so synchronicities are a special class of coincidences, and he didn't have a fully orbed explanation for them, but some folks have tried to explain synchronicities in terms of psychic functioning. You also could explain them in terms of divine causality. You know, God might bring some of them about, but if you have something that's really improbable that it would happen on its own, and yet it does happen and it's meaningful, then that would be a synchronicity. There's a famous example. This is kind of the classic example of a synchronicity. Jung was doing a talk therapy session with one of his patients, and this woman was very rational and was very unwilling to explore aspects of her character that Jung thought she needed to in order to make progress. But she was telling him about one of her dreams as they were talking in the therapy session. And she was telling him about a dream where she was presented with a piece of jewelry that looked like a golden Egyptian scarab, a scarab beetle, which
Right.
of course was sacred to the Egyptians. And so she's telling him about this dream, and then Jung hears a tapping at the window of his office where they're having this session, and he looks over, and on the ledge outside the window, what's causing the tapping is a little beetle that's golden colored. And so he opens the window and he reaches out and he gets the beetle and he hands it to the woman and says, "Madam, your scarab." And it was such a meaningful coincidence to her, given what she'd just been describing, that it helped convince her to not think of everything in strictly materialist, rational terms. And she was able to start making psychological progress, according to Jung.
Super interesting. Is it possible, we talk about God, like, arranging coincidences and so on. Is it possible God created a universe that helps coincidences happen? If they're like to meet people, if you're on the right path in your life, to meet the right people so you can do good things, whether it's educate people or, whatever. I just felt like there were so many things that there's just no way they could have been chance. And yet I never felt like, oh God, like somebody paid attention to me. I always felt like it was more just the universe, kind of generally some intelligence in the universe that was helping me. But of course, wouldn't have God created those, the universe as an intelligent kind of, I don't know. I don't even know. I'm not even sure what I want to say. Well, maybe you can put that into words.
Yeah. Well, from a Christian point of view, God definitely created intelligences in the universe like angels, and he's assigned. In fact, I've got a Mysterious World episode coming up on guardian angels.
Yes, that's what I want to talk about.
And so even if God didn't lead you to meet someone directly by himself, he might have had your guardian angel lead you to meet someone that you would either be able to benefit from knowing, or you would be able to benefit them. You could help them out. One of the things that I think that is important to bear in mind in considering situations like coincidences is we want to be a little cautious, because humans are pattern matching animals. We see patterns in everything. Even it's like, if you ever, back in the day when, if you turned on the TV late at night and the stations were off the air, you'd see static. And I remember I would do that as a kid, and I would look at the static and there's no meaning there, but I would start to see spinning pinwheels in the static and all kinds of patterns.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And
I remember those days at 2 a.m.
Yeah, exactly. And so humans have a tendency to see meaningful patterns in random data. And there's actually an evolutionary reason for that. It helps us survive and reproduce, because if let's say you're a caveman and you're out camping, or even if you're not a caveman, you're out camping, you're looking for Bigfoot, you got your double wide sleeping bag, you got your portable fan, and you hear this rustling in the grass. Well, if you assume that it's just nothing, then you may be okay. But if it turns out it's a panther that's on the hunt, the panther may leap out at you and grab you and start munching on you. And so there's a survival advantage if we assume that any noise we hear like that is actually meaningful and we need to pay attention to it. And so because of that evolutionary incentive, and as a Christian, I would say evolution is part of God's plan. Now, if you don't believe in evolution, that's fine. But just looking at it from whether you believe in evolution or not, humans will tend to survive better if they overreact to patterns and assume that something is meaningful and that they need to pay attention to it until it's proved that they don't.
Yeah.
And because we have that tendency to see meaningful patterns in random data, I would urge people to be a little cautious about every coincidence that they encounter and assuming it's meaningful. If it's something really bizarre, something really improbable, well, then yeah, definitely pay attention to it.
Well,
like
I think that though, meeting those two men,
yeah,
that I both ended up doing huge science things with, experiments with, and science stuff just seems so bizarre. And by the way, I reunited those two guys. They hadn't talked to each other in like 40 some years.
Wow.
And I said, Greg, here, I think you need to talk to this guy. And then reunited those guys. But
yeah.
So that was definitely a case where I don't think there was a pattern. And it could have happened by just happenstance, right? It could have. But man,
sounds pretty improbable to me.
It is. Yeah. Those are things that really make you go,
The key thing, though, in terms of our reaction to coincidences is, I would urge people to, unless it's really improbable, I'd urge them to relax and say, well, maybe it's meaningful, maybe it's not. And as long as there's no urgency to sort out that question, you can just kind of leave it be.
Isn't it important, though, Jimmy, to at least think about it a little bit? Isn't that kind of a responsibility to at least think about it, put a little thought into it?
In proportion to how improbable the coincidence is, the more improbable it is, the more attention it calls for. But there are all kinds of little coincidences that happen every day. And if we try to devote significant thought to them, we drive ourselves crazy. We wouldn't have time to do anything else.
Like you own a white car and a white car pulls up to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Parking lot. Yeah, no, I agree.
But regardless of whether it's a meaningful coincidence or not, we want to do good in the world. And so, if something happens and puts me in a particular situation, whatever that situation is, some coincidence happens and I'm in a new situation, I want to do good in whatever situation it is, regardless of whether the coincidence was meaningful or not.
Yeah.
What, Jimmy, what advice would you have if someone feels overwhelmed by the number of coincidences in their experience?
Well, I would say, I can answer, I guess, from a couple of perspectives. One of them is from a purely secular perspective, is it's probably time to back off if you're feeling overwhelmed by it, because the amount of attention that you have going on, paying attention to all these coincidences and trying to figure them out, I would say it's likely that you just need to relax, and you might need, psychological counseling to help you do that. You might even need, they have drugs to help you relax. You might need that. On the other hand, from a religious point of view, I would say, again, you probably need to relax and trust God. Even if you can't see the big picture and figure out the whole big picture, God knows it and he has a plan. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed, trust him. Like it says in the New Testament, put your cares on God because he cares for you. So you don't have to worry as much.
Were you asking for yourself, Alex, or for a friend?
For a friend.
Oh, God.
Yeah, but it's like Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about itself.
Yeah, that's good advice. So I'm just thinking here, if we want to open the guardian angel door, because that's such an important topic, I think, because I've heard so many stories from so many people. If you kind of, ask them in a really cool way, a lot of people will tell you some experience where they felt a guardian angel saved their life. Or I asked my nephew that question. We were having coffee out in my garage, and he said that he was standing on a curb. He was daydreaming, and he felt somebody grab him by the jacket and just jerked him back.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked behind him. No one was there. And then a bus. Literally, he would have been killed by this bus. And there was nobody there, he said. And that's a typical kind of story of a guardian angel that maybe saves somebody's life. What? I don't know. Just tell me all your thoughts about guardian angels, because I'm sure you've got a lot of them.
Yeah, well, it's actually interesting. The basis for guardian angels in the Bible is not as strong as you might think. In the Old Testament, there are situations in which God sends an angel to help somebody out, and the angel helps them on that occasion. But the idea of an angel regularly guarding this person isn't really around in the Old Testament. What you do find in the Old Testament is angels as guardians of nations. One of the things that Deuteronomy says is that when God divided up the nations, he assigned them to high-ranking angels that were called sons of God. That was a term that was used for high-ranking angels. Like we see that in the beginning of the book of Job, where we're up in heaven, God comes into his throne room, and all the sons of God or high-ranking angels come in with him. And so he put the different Gentile nations under the care of these sons of God. So they've got national guardian angels. And then he kept Israel for himself. Now, he did use an angel with Israel too, but he took a special interest because they were his chosen people. He had a special relationship with the people of Israel. Unfortunately, a lot of these national guardian angels went bad. And we know about that from the book of Daniel, because there's a place in Daniel where Daniel has been like fasting for 3 weeks. And he's wanting a vision from God. And after 3 weeks, the angel Gabriel, who's a high-ranking angel, he shows up and he says, "Okay, Daniel, I finally got here. I would have been here 3 weeks earlier when you first prayed, but the prince of Persia resisted me." And so he's talking about the angelic son of God prince that is in charge of Persia. And he says, the prince of Persia resisted me and I had to fight him. And the only reason I got through is because Michael, the prince of your people, so Michael's the angel in charge of Israel, Michael showed up and helped me. And right now, Michael's like got him in a headlock or a military holding action. And that's what let me get through the lines to bring you this prophecy. And then he gives the prophecy and he says, now I'm going to go and I'm going to go back and Michael and I are going to whale the tar out of the prince of Persia, and he's going to fall from power. And behold, the prince of Greece is going to fill that power vacuum. And this is a reference to the conquests of Alexander the Great, who conquered the Persian kingdom. And so, so we see that some of these angelic princes or sons of God are now resisting God's will. They're doing things like stopping good angels like Gabriel from getting through to do their job. So they've gone bad. And this is the Old Testament explanation for who the gods of the nations are. There are these angelic princes that instead of encouraging people to worship God, they encouraged people to worship them.
Yeah.
And so that's something else Deuteronomy says. It says the gods of the nations are Shadim, and the word shed means demon. So the gods of the nations are demons on this view. But it's in the New Testament. So we have national guardian angels, some of which are bad. But then in the New Testament, we have Jesus talking about how the angels of little children, and by extension Christians, always see God's face. So they always have guaranteed access to God to be able to tell them what's going on with the people they're their garden. And so you don't want to mess with little children, and you don't want to mess with sincere Christian believers, because their guardian angels have access to God, and it can go badly for you if you do. An example of that is found in Acts chapter 12, where Herod Agrippa I, who was Jewish king at the time, he's not Herod the Great, he's a grandson of Herod the Great, but Herod Agrippa I arrests and kills James, son of Zebedee, one of the core of the 12 apostles. There's sort of 4 core apostles among the 12. It's Peter, his brother Andrew, James, and his brother John. So Herod Agrippa I has just killed James, son of Zebedee. And he sees, according to Luke, that pleases the Jewish leaders. And so he arrests Peter. And he's planning on, this is in the year AD 43. And so he's planning on killing Peter too, but he's got Peter locked up in jail. And during the night, the guards are there, but they've fallen asleep. And an angel shows up and lets Peter out of jail and leads him out through the streets. And Peter thinks he's seeing a vision. He doesn't realize this is real. He thinks I'm seeing a vision. And then the angel vanishes. And Peter starts to realize, I'm not having a vision. I'm really out of jail. And so he goes to the house of a woman named Mary, who's the mother of Mark, who wrote the Gospel of Mark. And they're having a prayer meeting in Mary's house for Peter, because everybody knows he's in jail and he's going to be executed. And so they're praying for him. Well, Peter comes to the door and he knocks on the door, and a servant girl named Rhoda answers the door and hears Peter's voice. And she is so amazed, because everyone knows he's in jail. She is so amazed that Peter's outside the door talking to her, that she runs back into where they're having the prayer meeting, and she says, "Peter's at the door. Peter's at the door." And everyone thinks, "No, you're crazy. It can't be Peter. He's in jail. He's getting ready to be executed." But she insists, no, it's really him. And it's at this point they say, it must be his angel. And one of the very common interpretations of this verse is that they thought, since it couldn't be Peter, it must be Peter's guardian angel at the door. And there is at least some evidence in the ancient world that, at least in certain periods of history, people thought your guardian angel looked like you, or at least could appear as you. And so that could explain the similarities between who's at the door and the angel that they refer to.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about modern examples that are just, quick, where somebody never really even thinks about a guardian angel, and suddenly they realize they didn't get on a flight, they overslept, they get on the flight, and the flight crashes.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of examples.
What
about the modern things? And have you ever had an experience? You felt saved by just something.
Yeah.
Weird.
So
almost saved by a coincidence.
So I know my guardian angel's looking out for me. We all have guardian angels, and they're always looking out for us. And I'm sure I've done any number of stupid things or been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and my guardian angel helped me out. The question is, did he help me out in an obvious way? Like, did he ever, if I was about to be in a car crash, did he ever yank the steering wheel without me moving it so that I avoided the car crash? Well, no, nothing like that's ever happened to me. My guardian angel, at least thus far, has tended to help me in subtler ways that aren't as noticeable. But there are people who have the dramatic encounters like the one you mentioned. And there have even been books that have been written about them. Now, this isn't going to be in the upcoming episode on guardian angels, but in a later episode, I'm going to look at modern parapsychological research into angelic encounters. And to give you an example, there was a study done over in Britain a number of years ago, and it was by a woman named Emma Heathcote James. Heathcote James is a hyphenated last name. So Emma Heathcote James did a survey and a study of people who reported angelic encounters, and she wrote an academic book about them, and it's called Seeing Angels. And so she recounts a lot of different experiences and types of experiences that people had and reported about angels. Angels also show up in other types of experiences that parapsychologists study. For example, there's a cluster of what are known as death-related experiences that people have, and they can
Right.
occur
Yeah.
before death, during death, and after death. Before death, people have what are sometimes called deathbed visions, where they get like a peek into the afterlife. Then, when they either clinically die or almost clinically die, they have what are known as near-death experiences. And then after they really have died, they have what are sometimes called spontaneous after-death communications. And angels show up in all three of these. Sometimes when someone's having a deathbed vision, so they're laying on their bed, different things can happen. Their pain often shuts off.
Yeah.
Their mood elevates, and they may see heavenly light and hear heavenly music. And they, in fact, may say, "Oh, I hear the angels singing." But they also report seeing them. It's very typical in these experiences for someone to report that they're seeing either their departed loved ones or angels coming to welcome them into the afterlife.
It's too typical to ignore. It's
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Incidentally, in Jesus's parable of Lazarus and the rich man, he has Lazarus being taken to a place of comfort and rest by angels. So that corresponds to modern experiences. Then in near-death experiences, you have the same thing. You know, people will be greeted by their departed loved ones or angels. And then in after-death communications, angels don't always show up, but sometimes they do. I'm thinking in particular of one experience where a woman had lost her 2 young sons, and she was very broken up about it. And she reported that an angel came to her and took her, mentally into the afterlife and showed her that her 2 sons were in a place of happiness and comfort and peace and so forth. And that helped her move on with her grieving process. So you actually have angelic encounters in all three of these. What's interesting is this is not locked in to just to a Christian understanding of things. There was a famous study that was done back in the 1970s by a couple of researchers that looked at deathbed visions in both America and India. And they specifically picked America and India because of how different they were religiously. They wanted to do the same kinds of experiences happen. And they wrote it up in a book called, I may have the title slightly off, but it's like At the Hour of Death. And so in At the Hour of Death, they talk about how here in America, people will see departed loved ones and angels. And they talk about how, hang on. There we go. I meant to turn off my reminder before the show. That was telling me I need to take out the trash, just like it happened last time when you interviewed me.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
That's hilarious.
So in India, they found out
those.
Yeah. In India, they found out that people who were having deathbed visions will either see their departed relatives coming to welcome them into the afterlife, or they will see Yamdoots. Now, it so happens that in India, death is personified as Yama. So Yama is an entity that personifies death, and Yama has messengers that he sends out to bring people into the afterlife called Yamdoots. And so in an Indian context, people would say, yeah, a Yamdoot came to bring me into the afterlife. And since these are messengers of death, well, that's what the word angel means. It just means messenger in both Hebrew and Greek. So Christians will see, God's messengers is sent to bring them into the afterlife, and people in India will see messengers of death to bring them into the afterlife. But it's the same fundamental concept.
Do you think there's millions of guardian angels? Just hundreds of them, or infinite amount of guardian angels?
Well, we don't know. We do know that at least in the Bible, in terms of how many angels there are total, it uses the language of myriads of myriads. Now, a myriad is 10,000. And so a myriad of myriads is 10,000 times 10,000 or 100 million. And that may just be a low estimate because they didn't really have numbers bigger than a myriad to talk about how many there are. So if you say myriads, that just means a huge, enormous amount. And this gets into some of what I will be talking about in the upcoming Guardian Angels episode, because people have lots of questions about them. Like, when do we get them? And do we keep them after?
Yeah,
and after we die,
and can you talk to them, and can you ask them for favors? And
well, certainly from a Catholic point of view, you can ask your guardian angel to help you out, and it's what an individual's answer to that question is going to be will depend on the theological tradition that you belong to. From a Catholic point of view, there's no problem talking to saints and angels and saying, please pray for me and so forth. But people have to consult their own religious tradition and see what it says about it. But I ain't got no problem with it. In terms of how many there are, well, there have been about 100 billion humans that have lived in world history. And if each human has a unique guardian angel that only helps them, then there would need to be 100 billion guardian angels. Okay, fine. Maybe there are. I don't know. But what I do know is the only real guarantee we have here is that we will be adequately guarded. And so God guarantees, that's why he gave us guardian angels. God does things right. So we will have an appropriate level of guarding. But beyond that, we're not told the specifics of how this works. It could be that when we die, since we don't need guarding anymore, once you're in heaven, you don't need to be guarded. Maybe our guardian angel gets reassigned to someone else. And so you could explain the guardians of those 100 billion humans with a smaller number of guardian angels. Also, who says you only got one? Maybe individuals have multiple guardian angels, in which case the number might be bigger than 100 million.
That's interesting.
And maybe each guardian angel has multiple people they're guarding. Maybe they're like shepherds, where you got a single shepherd or a group of shepherds who guard a flock of sheep. And so maybe that's how guardian angels work. Maybe they guard us like human shepherds guard sheep. And so there's a whole little flock of people that your guardian angel or set of guardian angels are looking out for. So there's a bunch of different possibilities.
Well, then what happens when obviously somebody gets in a weird accident? Is it because their guardian angel was on vacation? Is it because they were supposed to die? And do you believe there's a date set that we're supposed to die?
I think that there is a date when we will die, and God knows that date, but that doesn't mean he caused us to die on that date. Like if you take the example of suicide. So I could go get my gun and put a bullet through my brain tonight. I'm not going to do that.
Just to be clear.
Suicide is a major no-no. And if anyone is tempted towards suicide, there is help. So, just Google suicide hotline. There are people who help.
It's always going to get better tomorrow. Even if you don't want it to, it'll get better.
It will. But to illustrate my point, I could kill myself tonight. And as a product of my own free will, God's not manipulating me to make me kill myself. I could do it by my own free will. And so I think God, since he's outside of time and sees all of history at once, he knows when I'm going to die, and he knows how I'm going to die, and he allows me to die at that point. But that doesn't mean he causes me to die.
No, but is there maybe a reason why somebody needs to die? Maybe there's something else they have to go do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You wonder about all these mysteries.
So now here we're touching on what's known as the problem of evil. Why would a good God allow evil? And there's two kinds of evil. There is what's known as moral evil, where someone does something evil, or sins, in other words. And then there's what's called physical evil in philosophy. Physical evil is basically suffering. So the two kinds of evil are sin and suffering. And in thinking about why would a good God allow evil, philosophers and theologians have proposed different answers to the two kinds of evil. The standard answer as to why God would allow sin or moral evil is because it allows free will. And God doesn't want us to just love him because he compels us to. Something is added to love when it's chosen freely. And so God gave us free will and invites us to love him and accept his love. But he's not going to force himself on us. And so if you allow free will, you have to allow the possibility that someone may misuse free will. They may sin. And so that's why he allows, this is the leading speculation on why he allows moral evil. But what about physical evil? The basic proposal, and this actually applies to moral evil too, but the basic proposal is God would not allow any evil, moral or physical, so neither sin nor suffering, unless he was going to bring about an equal or greater good out of that very evil. Otherwise, his own goodness would intervene, and he'd say, no, I'm going to stop this. So whenever you see an evil, including physical death, there is some equal or greater good that is going to come out of that. At least that's the Christian perspective on these things.
Balance.
And so can there be situations where God chooses to allow someone to die at this point? Yeah, in order to bring about some greater good. And in some cases, we can speculate about what the greater good is. We won't always be able to figure it out.
No, let's throw a few ideas out there.
Well, I've got a
few.
Yeah, and I'll be happy to do that. My point, though, is we may not be able to figure it out in a particular case in this life. It's kind of like when you're a kid and you're getting your childhood vaccinations. I remember when I was a small child and my parents would take me in for my childhood vaccinations as a toddler. And all of a sudden, these people who love me and care for me, my parents, are like holding me down and letting a stranger stick a sharp object in my body. And I wailed my head off. Yeah. And it hurt. And it was awful. Well, as a small child, I didn't understand what they were doing. I didn't understand this is going to prevent me from getting sicknesses later in life that could be much worse than the pain of the injection. And so it made sense for my parents to do that, to let me have, vaccinations. Well, and no offense to people who are opposed to vaccinations. It's just the reasoning makes sense. If vaccines are safe, which is an if, but if they're safe and they prevent these diseases, then it would make sense to have them. And so that's what my parents believed, and they had me vaccinated. And I don't have any reason to doubt that. But as a toddler, I couldn't understand what the purpose of this was. All I perceived was the evil. I didn't perceive the good that was going to come out of this evil.
That's a great example.
But as an adult, I can perceive the good. And so I'm essentially in the position of a toddler before God. I can't, if I experience certain evils in this life, I may not know why is God allowing them. Yeah. But I can trust that he's got a good reason that will eventually become clear to me, even if it's in the next life. So,
well, isn't one reason is just if somebody is taken from us, it makes everybody else left appreciate life more.
It could have that effect. Also, another effect, and by the way, God may bring about multiple different goods by allowing a particular evil. Another good, let's say someone is dying and they're suffering as they die. And, because that happens, as St. Thomas Aquinas pointed out, every system Every natural system will run down or break down over time unless it's supported by God's grace. So, in our present mortal state, our bodies will run down and break down over time. And as that happens, we end up suffering. People suffer the effects of old age. They suffer from diseases and things like that as they get older. Well, okay, by the time they die, some people are suffering a lot, and then they enter the afterlife. And often, before they enter the afterlife, their pain shuts off, either in a deathbed vision or it shuts off in a near-death experience. But once they drop their body, they don't have a body to suffer with anymore. And they're going to be, assuming they, have accepted God's love and grace, they're going to be with him forever. And that's why St. Paul can say in his second letter to the Corinthians that there is this weight of glory that's in our future, and the sufferings of this life are not worth comparing with it, because you're going to get infinite happiness, because it's going to go on forever, and that makes it infinite. You're going to get infinite happiness in the next life. And so one reason that God might allow some people to die at a particular point is so that they won't suffer anymore, and so they can go have that infinite happiness, which will more than compensate them for any suffering they had in this life. That's one of the great things about the Christian point of view compared to, say, the atheist point of view. If you think about things from an atheist point of view, we've got suffering in this life. There's no doubt about that. Everyone agrees on that. But from an atheist point of view, there's no redemption to the suffering.
Yeah.
We suffer and then we die, and that's it. But on the Christian point of view, we suffer and then we die, and then we get infinite happiness. And so all that suffering can be redeemed by what comes next, because death is not the end. And so that's kind of a sketch of what I'd say on some of these matters.
Okay, I have a question that somebody asked.
Sure.
Eric,
Yeah.
Sorensen. It's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've all thought about this.
I always say there are no bad questions. There's only bad answers.
Well, try this one out.
Mm-hmm.
And short answer, please, because we have so many topics we want to get into. Somebody like Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
Really evil, right?
Yep.
No question. Everybody knows it. Is that somebody who could been forgiven and then go to heaven?
From a Christian point of view, the answer would be yes. Jesus' death on the cross for us was of infinite value because he's the Son of God. And therefore, if he dies on the cross, his death has infinite value. And whatever a human has done, it's finite. And so Jesus more than compensated for all of the sins of mankind, including extraordinarily evil people like Adolf Hitler or Osama bin Laden. And it's therefore possible for them to be saved. Now, in order for that to happen,
yes,
in order for that to happen, they need to, turn and accept God's love and his grace, and he's not going to force himself on them. So, you look at, say, Adolf Hitler. Well, he died in a bunker by committing suicide, and we don't really have evidence of his repentance. So you could look at that and say, wow, it looks like he's going to be painting the walls of hell, as happens in a Harlan Ellison short story. Harlan Ellison's a science fiction writer. He wrote a story called Hitler Painted Roses, where Hitler's painting roses on the walls of hell. So, that could easily be what happened to Hitler.
In other words, he could have repented 1 minute before his death and he'd be saved.
Well, he could have not repented and gone to hell, and that would be it for him. But it is also possible, because God can reach people even in the last moments of life.
But what if it's
get them to turn and repent? Okay,
but what
even if it's invisible to us?
What if it's an insincere?
Well, God knows if you're BSing.
He's just doing it because he knows he's going to die, and just well, I got nothing to lose by asking for forgiveness type thing. Is that good enough for somebody like Hitler?
it's going to depend on it. So God knows if you're BSing him, if you're just insincerely repentant, he knows that, and it's not going to be enough. On the other hand, suppose we're talking about someone, and let's take the magnitude of Hitler's sins out of it, because that really didn't affect the principles. Let's say you got a person, and this person has done bad things in their life, but they're coming up to die, and they say, God, I don't know if you exist, and I don't know if there's an afterlife, but if you do exist, and if you do love me, and if there is an afterlife, please forgive me. And that kind of turning to God, even though the person's not sure, I would that all this is true, but they're open to it and they're trusting themselves to God in their final moments. I would say that gives us good reason to hope that they are saved.
Yeah, but I always wonder that somebody like Hitler was just so pure evil that there's no, because you hate to have people think too they can go out and do a whole bunch of bad things, murder people, and then a snap of a finger they can be forgiven. And
well, so from a Christian point of view in general, so all Christians would agree about this. Typically, Protestants, Catholics, Orthodox, everybody would tend to agree that it's hypothetically possible for anyone to repent. It's not like if Hitler genuinely repented, it's not like God's going to say, oh, sorry, no, I'm not going to forgive you if he's genuinely repentant, because Jesus's death was of infinite value. But one of the things that some Christians, like Catholics, would say is he's going to have a hell of a purgatory. Even if he does repent, he's going to be in intense need of purification after death, which is what the function of purgatory is to purify us so we can be ready for heaven.
Okay. So there's going to be punishment no matter what. There
will, whether you want to call it punishment or not, he's going to have to be purified of the effects of all that he did in life. And if you're a monster like Hitler, you've got a lot you're going to need to be purified from.
And that might be painful.
Oh, yeah.
On some level, yeah. Okay, I want to jump around because there's so many things I want to cover, and I wish we could do a 10-hour podcast, Jimmy. But
I've done 6.5 hour.
Have you really?
Yep. 6.5.
I could easily do that with you, because we could just jump into all sorts of crazy crap, and you always have such amazing, thoughtful answers, and
you do.
And I really appreciate that about you.
Y'all are too kind.
Okay. What do we want to jump into? I had something, but now it slipped my mind. Oh, what do you think the reason, the real deep down reason that we're back to Bigfoot, and then we're only going to be on Bigfoot for a little bit, but I want to know deep down in you, the journey, and you don't have to get deep into detail, but the journey that you had in your mind, because I'm hearing such a similar story from other scientists now that I've been dealing with, because I've had to contact so many. So many of them are kind of reminded me of the same story you told me, which is why I really want to get this information out. You went through a journey of not believing, not thinking, there's really anything to the Bigfoot mystery. And then you went on a journey and kind of came to a far more open-minded position, correct?
Yeah.
Open-minded. Okay. Can you just kind of go through that? Because your story is the same story I'm getting from many different people.
Yeah. So, actually, now I grew up in the 1970s, and there were lots of Bigfoot documentaries at the time, and I watched them and I took them seriously. So I didn't start off closed to Bigfoot, but I was open to Bigfoot as a kid, but then my focus went to other issues, and Bigfoot was kind of out of pop culture for a long time. Certainly wasn't as huge as Bigfoot is now. And I grew up, and I'm very interested in science. I read science books for fun. And so I study all different branches of science, and I absorbed expert opinion, because that's what you do. If you're not an expert, you listen to those who are, and you tend to defer to their opinions. Well, okay, most biologists, most zoologists today don't believe in Bigfoot. And so I absorbed that opinion from them. I also, when I started doing research on Bigfoot again, I encountered some bad data that was attributing things like the Patterson-Gimlin film to being an obvious hoax. And so I absorbed that bad data. And so I had even though I would love Bigfoot to be real, I didn't have much hope that he was, because of the expert opinion and because of the bad data I'd encountered. And then time rolls along, and I continue to research the issue, and I read Jeff Meldrum's book, Sasquatch. I also listen to the Astonishing Legends 11 or 13-hour saga about the Patterson-Gimlin film. And I realized there's a lot more to this. There's a lot more evidence that both that the Patterson-Gimlin film is real, and even if you forget the Patterson-Gimlin film, there's other evidence that Bigfoot could be real.
Okay, let me back up just a second.
Yeah.
Did you read Jeff's entire book?
Oh, sure.
Legend Meets Science.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
Legend Meets Science. Sasquatch Legend Meets Science was the name of the book that he wrote.
Yeah, I read the whole thing.
So that book, just so you know, was based on my doc.
Was it? Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I'm working on number 2 now. And now Jeff's writing number 2. Just so you know, you got number 2 to look forward to now.
I very much look forward to.
That's going to be, I think the next one will be even far better.
Uh-huh. Oh, cool.
So,
well,
anyhow, continue.
I anxiously look forward to that.
So I'm glad that book had some influence on you.
Yeah. But basically that moved me from a position of, well, I'm theoretically open, but I'm very skeptical that this could be real, to a position of I'm much more open. Now, that doesn't mean I'm convinced, because there's still an issue, which is if there is a breeding population of these things in North America, where we got lots of biologists and we got lots of camera traps looking for, and lots of people looking for Bigfoot, how could it remain undiscovered for this length of time? So that's, to my mind, a significant argument against Bigfoot, but I also think there are significant arguments for Bigfoot. So now I have a kind of middle position where I recognize problems, principally how could a breeding population remain undiscovered given all the factors here in North America, but I also recognize that there are other factors that are in favor of Bigfoot's existence. And so I would say I'm kind of middle of the road open-minded instead of leaning one way or the other.
So, okay, so you're open-minded. What was it? The enhanced footage, did that have any effect on you? Seeing the enhanced Patterson-Gimlin film, and what other evidence did you kind of look at closer? Because Jeff really covered a lot of it in his book.
He did. Deep. Actually, one of the things that that I found particularly compelling was the dermal evidence in the cases of some of the footprints. So, back in the day, there were people who hoaxed Bigfoot encounters using clumsy wooden boards, that they would strap on their feet. And I even remember when I think this was in the 80s, I was watching a TV show about a father and a son who had encountered a Bigfoot, but they didn't just encounter one Bigfoot. They encountered an adult Bigfoot and a juvenile Bigfoot, and they had prints on the road, and going, okay, this is so shady. It looks to me like instead of a father and son human encountering a father and son Bigfoot, you have a father and son pair of human hoaxers doing this for a laugh. And so, there were people who had wooden Bigfoot feet that they would hoax with. But one of the things Meldrum pointed out is that is not all of the Bigfoot prints we've got. We've got prints that are, footprints that are very deep, meaning that there was a big heavy weight on them, and that are flexible. You can see how the foot has flexed, which is what you would expect from a natural foot, not a board.
Yep.
And in some cases, the medium on which the footprint was impressed was fine enough that we have dermal ridges that still show up in the plaster cast. And you can study these dermal ridges. It's the equivalent of fingerprints. We have, as humans, now not every species has fingerprints. As humans, we do. We also have toe prints, and on the bottom of our feet. The purpose of those is to give us greater gripping ability, so that because what the fingerprints and toe prints do is they create friction with what we're grasping. And this is because we grew up in trees. We're swinging from one branch to another. You don't want slippery hands. If you're swinging from one branch to another, that's why our arms can do this. We're brachiators. And you don't want to grab for a branch and have your hand slip off of it, and then you fall to the forest floor. So primates, including humans, have dermal ridges on the contact surfaces of their hands and feet, which they can then, to one degree or another, grab stuff with. And it's also, by the way, that's why when we put our hands in water or our toes in water, that's why they wrinkle up. It's not that the oil, I heard as a kid, it's because the oil is leaching out of your skin. No, it's a reflex. When our bodies sense that our hands or feet are immersed in water for an extended period, it causes them to wrinkle to give us additional friction.
Right, grip.
So that we can grab things in the water, or so that we don't slip on stones in the water.
Yep.
And so Bigfoot, being a primate, should have this dermal ridges too. And in some Bigfoot prints, the medium was fine enough to capture dermal ridges. And according to Meldrum, the dermal ridges are different than human dermal ridges. Like with human footprints, we have dermal ridges that go across our feet. But if I recall correctly, he says in Bigfoot, the dermal ridges go vertically on Bigfoot feet. And this is consistent not just in one set of prints, but across different prints. And to me, that's very notable evidence. I mean, it's not as great as having a live specimen, but that's really impressive. If we have this selection of Bigfoot prints that preserve dermal ridges that are consistent from one to another.
Do you think that there is a kind of a collective openness that's coming over the whole world when it comes to some of things like Bigfoot and UFOs and aliens? Do you just think it's just kind of a collective thing, maybe caused by the internet or certain TV shows? I don't know what it is, but it's like I'm not meeting any resistance anymore.
Mm-hmm.
When I contact a scientist, they seem happy to work on this mystery now.
Well, I think it's going to vary from one group to another. Now, in the case of UFOs, 2017 was the game changer. When the New York Times in 2017 published information about the ATIP program and they released those videos that everybody could see, that changed the nature of the discussion. When it comes to Bigfoot, I'm not as much of an expert on the history of the movement as you are, so you'd be better qualified to say than I am.
Well, because I did that doc back in 1999, started producing it, and the resistance was terrible back then.
Uh-huh.
And now it's like the opposite.
Yeah, well, because of your work and the work of other people like Jeff Meldrum and so forth, and Jane Goodall and other people who have significant reputations in this area, there may have been a shift in this, at least in terms of what various scientists are going to be willing to say privately.
Yeah.
They may not want to go in public and say this, but there may be some more openness in a private area. On the other hand, there's still those psychop folks. I think these days they call themselves CI, Center for Inquiry, but they're hardcore skeptics, and they're not open. But a lot of other people may be becoming more open.
Yeah. Yeah. Amy Boo started Zoo Book, and I've now got some other. I mean, I've watched that grow. All these scientists that have joined the Zoo Book anonymously.
Mm-hmm.
To get information on the topic, share stories, share scientific information. It's a place where researchers can exchange information with scientists.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be many of those scientists, which is weird, many of them have had some kind of an experience. And it seems like I'm running into more and more people too, including scientists that had some kind of weird experience, like when they were out camping, something was throwing rocks at their tent, or they heard a scream. It just seems to be more common now. It's just kind of weirding me out.
Yeah,
the big change that I'm seeing.
Throwing rocks is notable because you need a brachiator arm to do that. And even though bears can plausibly, at least there's an argument that they could plausibly be mistaken for a Bigfoot if you see a bear under the right conditions. Bears can't throw rocks. They're not brachiators. And so, and their front paws would even have trouble gripping a rock, much less would they be able to heft it back and then throw it forward. So if you've got rocks being thrown at a tent, what that tells you is, at least to my mind, and I'm not a biologist, maybe some biologist, or I'm not a zoologist, maybe some zoologists could correct me on this, but it seems to me you're looking at a primate. You're looking at something with a brachiator arm. And so, and we don't have monkeys here in North America. So, and we don't have native chimps and gorillas. So if you can rule out human throwing rocks at your tent, then that would tend to support Bigfoot.
Yeah. Now, Superfly, I think it was, Sly Fox says the U.S. Forest Service is embracing their existence now also, along with other agencies. And I'm actually finding that true. I just interviewed a U.S. Forest Service guy, totally open about it. It's like, what? He's going to be in the new doc. And I'm like,
cool.
I'm shocked. I'm just like, what? And he's talking openly about it. And I'm just like,
by the way, let me ask you a couple questions.
Yeah.
So first one, here about an hour from me, there is a town called Stillwell, Oklahoma, where they have a Bigfoot symposium every year.
Yeah.
I'm going to be at it next year.
Good.
If you guys happen to be there, I'd love to meet you in person.
Oh, cool. No, that'd be cool.
Yeah. Second question.
Yeah.
So putting the Patterson-Gimlin film aside, because there's been tons of discussion of that, but putting that aside, what do you think the second best or the next best still or motion imagery of Bigfoot is?
Well, I think I really do think it's the anecdotal combination of Patty, the Freeman footage, the Memorial Day footage, and those three all have something greatly in common. The creature was out in the open. It's unobscured by forest material. All of them seem to be postpartum. All of them seem to be leading away the person that bumped into them accidentally. Almost like a killdeer, like follow me, right?
Which would tell you that if that's true, if that's an accurate observation, that would tell you that there's something that the Bigfoot is leading you away from.
Yeah.
Likely young.
Right. And I find things like that, where the gate on the Patterson-Gimlin footage, we'll be going very deep into it. That gate has so much, it's so complicated, Jimmy, and has so much to tell us. It is so complicated that I doubt you could stand still and hold a true position
Mhm.
of Patty in the way she walks with such extreme leg angles, hip angles,
So
thigh angles, ankle angles. It's really complex, and it's very. I always tell people it's just like a Peruvian horse. It's if you just go on YouTube, look up Peruvian horse gait. It's a naturally gaited horse, and study their gait. That's exactly what Patty's doing, except Patty has 2 legs, not 4.
right. Okay, so I already know where to find resources on the Patterson Gimlin film, but you're saying the Freeman footage and Memorial Day footage
Right.
are the other 2 really good ones. So I'm going to look those up and see
Yes,
what I
in
can
the
find out
Freeman
about.
footage, Alex, can you get Jimmy tomorrow the enhanced version of the Freeman footage?
Mhm.
In fact, we really should send him a book that's got the
Yeah.
footage in it. We'll send you a complimentary book. I think Michael Freeman would be very proud to have you have it.
Oh,
It's
thank
called
you.
the Freeman Files book, but in there is researcher Paul Freeman,
Mhm.
his entire audio diary over many years,
Mhm.
his research, and the footage of the creature and the creature I saw, or the baby lift that I noticed that Paul didn't know anything about.
Mhm.
He just thought it was another creature that he saw, and he never even noticed it was lifting an infant.
Mhm.
So when I enhanced it, I could see not only the infant getting lifted, the head, the feet reach around the waist of the creature and grab onto it.
Mhm.
And the reason it's important, because this was in the 90s, there was no CGI then.
Mhm.
There was no AI. So these early films actually have more to offer us than the newer. Does that make sense? It just,
Oh yeah, at least until we get copy-proof copy-proof file footage, which is possible. We don't have it yet. It's at least not commercially available as far as I know, but it is possible to create like single recording media that has its own provenance, so you can't fake it.
right.
But we're not there yet technologically. We're kind of living in this period
It's
where,
a dangerous period.
yeah,
I'm actually encouraging researchers to get and buy 16 millimeter film cameras, fixed focus, instant on, spring wind for their expeditions, because
makes sense. Yeah, you can't fake a negative.
you
in
can't
the
fake a
same way.
negative. In the negative, these things start recording instantly. Like, within a tenth of a second, you're rolling film. There's no warming up. There's no reaching for this, hitting this button, hitting this app, hitting that phone app. It's just so much easier than any kind of camcorder. It's just pull the trigger. And I've been.
Oh yeah, I
encouraging
remember motion picture cameras that looked like radar guns, and you would pull the trigger to
And they
start recording. Yeah.
Yep. They're spring wind, and you can get them cheap. You can buy them for $20,
Yeah.
and you can still get film at Walmart.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just saying,
Pick one up at the same time as you get your double wide sleeping bag.
exactly. Oh my God! I'm going to get so much crap for that. It's just, I'm going to tell you, if you ever camp, I would imagine you do on occasion. Never. Once you get a double wide sleeping bag, you will never go back to a single one ever.
I can understand why.
It's just so nice. It's like, my goal today was just like, God, camping is so miserable. Why is it so miserable? It doesn't need to be. We live in 2024. Like, we're beyond the Jetson years, right? Like, we should have comfy camping.
And we still don't have flying cars.
No, we don't have. Well, we actually sort of, but yeah, they're not available to the general public.
Yeah.
But I do know this, that there's no sense being uncomfortable. Let's put it that way. Life is short.
I agree.
So, okay.
By the way, just to let you know, I will need to go soon.
Okay, that's fine.
Would love to come back if you all would ever like
let's
have me
do
back.
that. Let's end it on one last topic.
Sure.
Missing people. Have you gone down that rabbit hole at all of people that go missing in these very mysterious ways in forested areas?
So the work that I'm familiar with in that area is David Paulides' Missing
correct.
411.
Yep.
And he has an argument, I'm sure your audience knows about it, but for anyone who doesn't, he's got an argument that people go missing under mysterious circumstances in national parks, and that the National Park Service is not properly attending to these. And like I remember hearing him say some years ago, and I assume this is still true, although I don't know that they don't even have a comprehensive database of people who go missing. And I think that there's something to look into here. What I'm not convinced of is that it's anything paranormal. I'm open to it being something paranormal, but I can think of lots of other explanations for why people go missing in forests, including they want to vanish. People get to points in their lives sometimes where they want to do there's a British TV show from back in the 70s called The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin. And Reginald Perrin is a businessman. He's leading an unhappy life. And so he goes down to the beach and fakes his own suicide. But you don't have to fake your own suicide. Some people just get tired and they want to go. They want to make a break with their current life and do something else. And so they might want to vanish. Other people, they might have a psychotic break. Either due to something internal to them, or they mistakenly eat ergot or something in the woods that causes them to have a psychotic break, and they wander off and do weird stuff. Or they could have.
Did you ever hear about that? Just speaking of that Discovery producer working on that Gold Rush show lifted his arms up, started screaming, ran off into the woods, and he's never been seen since.
Wow. I haven't heard about that.
Oh, you haven't? Well, look it up.
Okay.
It's one of the weirdest cases.
Yeah. There also can be so people can have psychotic breaks. They could have a stroke or an aneurysm that doesn't kill them, or maybe it does kill them and they fall off a ledge and their bones are never found, or they have a stroke and they lose part of their memory and they're amnesiac. There have been cases like that where people have lost their memory and it's like, I don't know who I am, and they have no way of tracing themselves back to their former life. And then there are murders. And then there's
I would say probably murders maybe account for, could be as high as 10, 15% of those missing people.
And there's sex trafficking. Some people may get captured and, human trafficked. So I can think of bunches, and then there are accidents that people may have. And I haven't made a list. I mean, you asked me just off the top of my head.
Yeah, right.
And so, but I've already, I think, here thought of more than a dozen possible explanations for why someone would appear to go missing in a national park. And so I'm open to paranormal explanations in this area. I just haven't yet seen convincing evidence.
Have you read the 411 series yet?
Unfortunately, no, because they're not available on Kindle. And I have dyslexia, which makes it hard for me to read regular books. But I have listened to bunches of interviews with David Paulides. And I wish he'd put his books on Amazon in a format where I could read them, because I'd love to do that.
All right, I'll bring that up to him.
Yeah.
I will bring that up. That's Alex.
That's a good point.
We need to talk to David about that. That's interesting. Yeah, it is such a fascinating topic. And I agree that those are all probably maybe 1%, 2% could be this, 1%. But there still is a percentage of them that are so bizarre where, like sometimes they'll find the body, but it's so far away.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make it. There's no way he could have gotten from here to there, and he's naked. And it's just, and the dog has disappeared, and he left all of his, he dropped all his stuff along the way.
Mhm.
It's survival things that you would need, which doesn't make sense.
Yeah, although there is such a thing as paradoxical undressing.
Yeah, when you get cold. Yeah, no, I
yeah,
realize. When you're freezing, you feel hot.
yeah.
No,
And
I understand that.
I'm
But
not saying that
this
explains
is
these
not that kind of
things.
weather. It's like,
Yeah.
balmy 70 degrees, fall hunting sometimes where it's been balmy.
Mhm.
Some of the things just don't make sense. But it'd
Yeah.
be fun to talk more about it. And it'd be fun to figure out a way to get you some of those books.
Yeah, sure. I'd it's definitely a subject I want to know more about.
It's definitely up your alley for
Mhm.
sure. Well, with that, thank you so much. We can set another date to get you back here in a few months or even sooner,
I'd
and
be
go
very
down
pleased.
some more odd topics and rabbit holes. But thanks so much, Jimmy. We
Yeah, no, great
think the
talking with you
world of it.
guys.
Thank you,
Everybody loves
Jimmy.
you, so thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Y'all are very kind and happy to come back.
Yep, we'll talk soon. Thanks, Jimmy.
Okay.
Take care.
And before we go, just one more reminder that if you like what you've watched, you can help me out by liking, commenting, and especially by subscribing. I'm trying to grow my channel and I'd really appreciate your help. Thank you, and God bless you.